animated series, myself and all my peers in the world knew the Avengers was the first of its kind. Not only were we putting this many comic book superheroes in one place at one single point in time, but it was a convergence of all these separate storylines. And that was bold of Kevin Feige to even believe that was possible one day. And it lived up to every expectation. What were your fondest memories of being a part of the Avengers film?
You know, my memories of that summer, we made it in the summer of 2011. And actually, my fondest memories are of us all together. And we made it in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in Cleveland, Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and in New York City. And what I remember really is the camaraderie and the sense of fellowship and family engendered by the commitment and the risk. That it was sort of 7 or 8 of us. I guess it's the original 6, plus me, plus Sam Jackson as Nick Fury and Kobe Smulders and Clark Gregg. So I guess 10 principal characters. I'm sure I'm missing a few out, but it felt, for a movie of the size that it is, it felt small because nobody had ever made a movie like this before, and there was a great sense of opportunity and risk and pressure, and none of us, we all wanted it to be great. And I find it very moving to look back on that summer because it was actually those actors, Robert Downey and Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth and Scarlett Johansson, Mark Ruffalo, Jeremy Renner, Sam, Kobe, Clark, I've mentioned. Did I miss anyone out? I don't think so. Everybody worked so hard and with such humility and such care. Everybody took it so seriously and they wanted it in their individual way. We were all in the stunt gym half the time, you know, practicing our stunt routines when we weren't on camera, on set. And, you know, we'd have barbecues at the weekend, and there was just this great sense of the team. And I find it very moving when you watch people who have enormous talent not take anything for granted, and they just try and make it even better. And, you know, the people I've mentioned are enormous talents. They're just incredible actors. But I was very inspired by their work ethic. So yeah, my fondest memories are of that, really, just being together and being in a team and giving every ounce of heart and soul to make it great. That's what I remember.
Love that.
It's a real privilege. It's a privilege. I've spoken about it in other contexts about pressure. Like, obviously, it was a big swing for Marvel. It was a big swing for Disney at the time. And we wanted to connect with everybody who loved Marvel and the Avengers. And you said if you love Marvel, everyone who loved these stories in the comics, or who part of their childhood or part of their family unit, they loved Marvel and they wanted to make it great for them. And so we felt pressure. But as I've spoken about in different contexts, this pressure is a privilege because we knew we were breathing rare air. That nobody else had ever got a chance to do this before. And so I remember that summer, the summer of 2011, as one of the most alive times of my life. I remember almost every day of that summer. It was a summer like no other. I'm very grateful, a real privilege.
Let's fast forward a little more. Prior to filming Thor Ragnarok, the Russo brothers, I learned this recently, by the way. Before filming Thor Ragnarok, the Russo brothers revealed to you Loki would not make it past the first scene of Infinity War. Wait a minute, let me finish the question. What had you felt in that moment learning of Loki's fate, and how much or how little did that affect your experience filming on Ragnarok?
You know, it's so interesting. At that time, I had not played Loki for 3 years. I had last appeared in a Marvel Studios picture in Thor: The Dark World, and since then, the Marvel Cinematic Universe had expanded in the most extraordinary ways. We've been introduced to the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the expansion of the Captain America universe. We had Winter Soldier, we had Doctor Strange, we had Black Panther, we had Ant-Man. All these amazing movies with amazing actors, and I remember there was I think it was Civil War. Yeah, basically Thor and Loki had kind of been on the bench for a while, and Ragnarok was when we were back in the fray, and it was very exciting for both Chris and myself because we hadn't played the characters for a while. And that's when Joe and Anthony Russo told me about the opening scene of Infinity War, and it was a strange feeling of like, because it was an introduction to both Ragnarok and that at the same time, which was it sounded honestly epic. The arc of it sounded so had such gravity and such weight, but also was inclining towards redemption, which is what I had always hoped we would try to do. The Dark World ends on a cliffhanger with Loki on the throne, and so really this was like just a story of like bringing Loki back from being the wayward brother, being invited back into the heart of the family, and that's what Ragnarok's about. Really, it's about Thor and Loki trying to grow and change and evolve and set aside their differences and defend Asgard together. To the extent that then in Infinity War, what I always saw as this kind of conclusive redemption was Loki referring to himself as Odin's son. And so I was very moved by it, and also kind of sad about it, but it was so beautifully drawn that I was excited about playing the arc, about bringing Loki back to his brother and to his belonging, because I think the most interesting aspect of the character is that he feels he never quite belongs. So it was a strange feeling, a mixture of excitement because I had this extraordinary arc to play, and also sadness that maybe I'd reached the end of the line. And yet, I'm still here.
That's what I've learned a lot about sort of how Kevin and Marvel Studios functions and operates. They don't really tell you anything until the very last minute. So you went on after Infinity War thinking you weren't really ever going to come back. What was the conversation like, and how did you react when Kevin said, "All right, I changed my mind. We're not only bringing you back, we're going to give you your own series"?
It was like one of those roller coaster rides where you're not quite sure where the dip comes. I really thought it was over for me, and there had been a moment. I think Kevin also thought it was over for him too. There was a moment where I thought, this has been a decade of my life. It's completely changed my life in the most extraordinary way. I've got to play this extraordinary character. A decade is a nice round number. Kevin Feige and Louis D'Esposito and all my friends at Marvel Studios, we exchanged letters and gifts and hugs and rounds of applause, and it was like, you're always part of the family, come see us anytime. And then 10 months later. So, and it was exciting because I think Kevin had always planned to do something. As soon as I heard about the scene in Endgame, as soon as I heard that Endgame involved some sort of temporal loop of the Avengers going back in time to essentially to that first denouement of the first Avengers movie, and that Loki gets to slip through he picks up the Tesseract and disappears in a puff of smoke. And so my first question was, so where does he go? And Kevin said, well, just give us a second. So when they called and wanted to ask about the show, that really was one of the most, it was almost like a recreation or a volume 2 of that feeling of that very first phone call. They said we're gonna go further with Loki, and it's Loki on his own, taking the starting point as that scene in Endgame, and it's going to be the beginning. Loki will introduce us to the multiverse, and they were so generous. They said, Tom, you've been playing this character for 10 years. You know him better than anybody. What do you want to do with him? And one of the things was I wanted to basically confront him with his self. I wanted to hold up the mirror to Loki and show him the depth and complexity of his nature. And brilliant producers at Marvel Studios called Kevin Wright and Stephen Broussard, about a couple of months later, they sent me a sort of story document, and they included the idea of this TVA. And the TVA crops up in Marvel Comics in the 80s, and it's very, very niche. It's this bureaucratic organization that claims to govern the order of reality, the unfolding of time. And what if Loki was arrested by the TVA for picking up the Tesseract and disappearing? He's not supposed to do that. Loki is supposed to be taken to Central Park and go back to Asgard and be hauled before Odin and have that scene at the beginning of Dark World. So where does he go? He gets arrested by the TVA. Well, the TVA is an institution of regimented order, and Loki is an agent of chaos. So you have order and chaos, and I thought that was an amazing place to begin a story. So this sense of Loki as a show, having had 10 years on the field as Loki, in my body, in my soul, understanding him from the inside, and then for it to be essentially about a confrontation with the whole show's about identity and purpose and belonging.
Glorious purpose.
Glorious purpose, yeah. It's not by accident that the first episode of the first season is called Glorious Purpose, and the last episode of season 2 is also called Glorious Purpose. This is a character who came down, and I looked at Nick Fury and I said, I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose. In that film, that reading of the line is full of entitlement and arrogance and hubris and a kind of yearning for status. And the 12 seasons of Loki are actually about unpacking that. It's about burdened with glorious purpose. That younger Loki wanted glory. He wanted power. And actually those 12 episodes of the show are about revealing some deeper purpose of his soul, which is to use his ability for good, to use his ability to hold the possibility of choice together for everyone else. And so he transforms from being the god of mischief into being a god of stories. And I found the journey of making the show, I found it so stimulating, so fulfilling. I poured so much of my own ideas into it. I loved making it. I loved working with Kate Herron and Justin Benson, Aaron Moorhead, and Dan DeLue, and Casper Farahani, all the directors of the show. I loved working with the acting company, with the great Owen Wilson. and Sophia Di Martino, and Wumi Masaku, and Gugu and Bartolo, Ki Hui Kwan. It was so yeah. It's been the Loki show has been one of the great surprises of my life. I mean, you asked about that first phone call, and I was excited about playing Loki in a movie called Thor. I didn't know it was going to be 16 years of story, and they've been some of the deepest and richest and most nourishing and most fulfilling periods of my life as an actor, to go this deep into a character and tell stories about time and about choice, so that actually, in the words of the great Owen Wilson as Mobius, sometimes purpose is more burden than glory, and that's what Loki chooses in the end. And to be where he is now, I couldn't have dreamed of that.